Hello, everyone, and welcome to this February installment of Beyond the Writing of Fiction. Our moderator this afternoon is writer and book coach Courtney Maum, and she hosts guests like Dr. Rebecca Hall, who's joining us from across the literary stratosphere for this new monthly program, Beyond the Writing of Fiction craft series. From self-published authors to screenwriters, mystery writers, memoir writers, and many other kinds. The breadth and diversity of their interviewees celebrate Edith Wharton's affection for various forms of writing while focusing on the elusive but essential tool of craft. Joining Courtney this afternoon is Dr. Rebecca Hall, a scholar, activist, and educator who writes and speaks on the history of race, gender, law, and resistance, as well as on climate justice and intersectional feminist theory. Her recent highly acclaimed graphic novel, Wake, The Hidden History of Woman-Led Slave Revolts, weaves history and memoir that focuses on slave revolts in the Middle Passage and in New York City, and her own quest to uncover this unwritten history. Join me all in welcoming Courtney and Dr. Rebecca Hall.
Hello.
Here we go.
Hi,
Hello,
everyone. Hi, everyone on the East Coast. Yeah.
So I actually love to start that way. I know you've been all over the world recently with this incredible book. So you might not even feel like you're grounded somewhere physically today, but where are you speaking to us from?
Very jet lagged, and I'm speaking to you from Salt Lake City.
Salt Lake City. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, which has been my home for about 10 years, and hopefully will soon not be our home. Yeah. Although the nature is stunning here, just unbelievable. Yeah.
It really is. I've been lucky enough to go. For those of you at home who recognize where I'm speaking to you from, once again returning from my husband's man hut in our backyard, because our this wonderful series coincides with my daughter's return from the bus, and try as I might, I can't quite get her to respect the sanctity of my office, but I'm grateful for the space, and I am so honored to be in conversation with you, Dr. Hall, about this totally groundbreaking book, which, you know, who knows what to call this. In my mind, I've been, and when I brag about it to other people, the fact that I'm speaking with you, I've called it everything from an illustrated history to a hybrid graphic narrative. And I thought we might kick things off by asking you if you could describe your book in your own words for people who are not lucky enough to have read the book yet.
Sure. Yeah. So just as a little backstory, I'm a JD PhD in history, and I decided to turn my dissertation into a graphic narrative. It was a very weird decision, but this book is the result. So yeah, I've read graphic novels a lot. I've read them to my son. I've taught them. You know, the ones that deal with history or memoir I just feel like there's things you can do in that medium that you just can't do in other mediums. And we can talk in more detail about that. But so, you know, I was a fan. In fact, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, which was just banned right in Tennessee, it was in a way like a direct inspiration for this book. I'm like, wow, you can do that, you know, in this medium. I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to do it. I mean, I'm not going to be as good as his stuff, but I'm going to try to do it. And, you know, to tell a history / memoir. Problem was, I've never written anything like it. Never thought of myself as a visual person, had only ever written and published in academia, law school textbooks, you know, boring stuff like that. And I wanted to do this book because I had done research that was so important to me. Based on my dissertation, I published a couple articles, And then, I am not in academia for reasons we can discuss if we have time. And I didn't want to feel like this work got left behind because it was important to me. And, the articles I've written on it, probably like 10 history graduate students have read it. So I wanted to create something that was accessible, but still preserved its complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to wrap my brain around this medium and how to write a script. I had to find an artist because I can't draw a stick figure. And we had to figure out a way to work together to make this relationship between images and pages. And I think, images and text. And so I wouldn't call it an illustrated history. Although NPR said it sets the new standard for illustrating history, which was like, oh, thank you. But because, that can be anything where you're like, I don't know if you've seen all those like, intro to Albert Einstein or whatever, and you've got a bunch of text and then you get a few photos, or intro to Frantz Fanon's thought, and those don't have the pictures and the text in relationship with each other. And it's a really crucial relationship because that's where the power of the medium comes from. So I had to learn to do that. And so it's a book about my research that I did on women who led slave revolts. And it focuses in New York City in the 1700s. And also in the 1700s on slave ship revolts during the Middle Passage. And I found out that I had to actually put myself as a character in the book, which I wasn't planning to do, because the archival sources are so fragmentary that I felt like I needed to sort of explain and make the connections. And then once I had myself as a character, I realized that I wanted to talk about, why write if you're not going to talk about what's true and painful? It just seems like a waste, And so I started to write about my experience researching this and what it's like to live in the wake of slavery in the United States. My paternal grandparents were born enslaved, which we can talk about more later if we want. But, that's a very unusual thing. I'm just 59, just shy of 60. And both my paternal grandparents were born in 1860. My grandmother, who this book is dedicated to, on a plantation in Virginia, and my grandfather on a plantation in Tennessee. And it's very unusual. There's a vast series of generation skips in my, in my family, but the fact that it's even possible is the point, right? That this is not ancient history. And I wanted to talk about how this past history informs, almost everything about race in America. And then, ended up like my grandmother shows up in it, which I wasn't expecting. And it was fun to research her. I found all kinds of things I didn't know about her. She died long before I was born. And that's the book. So it's kind of a series of nesting things, right? It's the story of these slave revolts. It's the story about my researching these slave revolts, and the research journey, and living in the wake of slavery. And the term wake, many scholars of slavery engage with this term. Wake is such an amazing word because it has all these multiple valences, right? There's like the living in the wake of something, like in the wake of a ship. There was this page that Hugo, my illustrator, and it literally took us over 40 hours to figure it out. I can't even begin to tell you how much work goes into this. It's just like, but you see the wake of a slave ship, and we use the waves of the wake as the gutters that surround the panel, and we can talk about gutter panel because it's crucial. Then there's wake, like when you honor the dead. And then there's, of course, wake, like wake up. And so that's why the book is titled as it is. And right now it's being published in 6 other languages, and none of those languages have a similar word. So it's kind of a struggle. That's interesting. So yeah, I mean, that's the book.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to return throughout our conversation. A lot of my questions are going to circle back to many of the things that you said, including I want to touch upon your relationship with Hugo Martinez, the illustrator, and also your grandmother that you dedicated the book to. But before we venture into that territory, I wanted to ask you, you have talked about how your personal mental health formula includes you talking about slavery resistance when you talk about slavery. And you've also said in some interviews that you think history is poorly taught in America. I happen to agree. I was wondering if these two things go hand in hand for you.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, what I was describing, I think, in these previous interviews is, you know, I went to graduate school specifically to try to understand how the creation of chattel slavery, you know, both legally and politically and socially, impacts how race is we experience race in our country today. But I found I couldn't just do that because it was like I said, it wasn't a good mental health formula. So I switched my focus to, I found out what I wanted to find out in that regard, my original intent. And then I needed to switch my focus to slave resistance because, yeah, definitely. And I think part of the thing in terms of like you connecting that, you know, which is a great question. Like one of the things that's so crucial is that, you know, the history of the resistance of enslaved people is basically not taught. And it is really a huge disservice, just generally speaking. But I like, but in terms of the mental health of the Black community, it is really problematic. You know, there was, you know, during the George Floyd uprising, there was this famous, it became a meme of a young Black woman wearing a T-shirt that said, "This is not my ancestors' uprising." No. Implication being, you know, we're serious this time, you know? And I felt really sad for her and angry about our educational system because she hadn't been taught that, you know, the resilience and resistance of our ancestors is just like it's just awe-inspiring, and none of us would be here without it. And we weren't meant to survive, you know? And so, and the other thing is, like, I don't know if people are, so like, you know, the R&B artist, you know, Kanye, whatever his last name is.
Kanye West.
Thank you, yeah. You know, said, you know, if there was slavery for 400 years, then it must have been a choice for us, you know? And so this is what happens when you don't teach resistance. You know, it's kind of like when you sit down and talk to your child, let's say, you know, you're Jewish and you want to talk to them about the Holocaust. You have to think really carefully, like, are they old enough? When should I do it? It's just gut-wrenching decision that you have to make. You know, when you do the same thing, you know, to your child who's a descendant of enslaved people, you know, it's so important when you do this to be able to say right away, and we resisted it every step of the way. Yeah. And our resistance was instrumental in bringing about the downfall of this institution.
Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, what you say about teaching resistance, I also hear a lesson in celebrating resistance. I mean, I know for my own self, I went to a really good private school in Connecticut, an expensive K through 12 school, top level education, and history, the way, you know, slavery was taught was just, oh God, let's get it out of the way. It's so embarrassing.
Mhm.
And it really wasn't taught. It wasn't taught. And in fact, I'm still learning today as a 43-year-old, pretty educated, involved working woman. And I realize now that at least in high school, thank goodness, I had I had all male white history teachers, but there was more diversity in who was teaching us English. And I will say that it was through poetry and songs, right? Because it was a school where we sang a lot, and we were definitely starting to sing some mournful tunes. And I thought, well, where the heck are these coming from? And, you start to realize that some of these songs we're hearing on the radio or that, people are singing as hymns are not really ours to sing. And then was exposed to poetry. And, just this weekend, I learned that capoeira, which I had always heard was, Brazilian martial arts, in fact, was a way for African enslaved people to keep their culture alive and their souls vibrant. And, I just...
And to fight back.
And to fight back, of
Right.
course.
Right. And, I'm in this sort of weird position because my career has been so strange. Like this latest iteration of my career, like, oh, I'm an author. Like I still can't wrap my brain around that. I mean, I was a lawyer. I practiced law for 8 years. I did work with low-income tenants and in Berkeley, because I went to Berkeley Law, and then, then I got my PhD in history, and then, anyway, but long story short, I have taught graduate school, law school, undergrad, and high school. And so I have this very broad experience of teaching. I have to say my favorite is high school, but that's the whole other. But and I have a very direct exposure to how poorly this subject is taught. And learning history is power. History is power. It's wielded, right? History as a discipline was originally created to sort of prop up the nation state, right? I mean, it's a relatively recent discipline. So with the rise of nationalism in the 19th century, you get this official discipline of history, which was basically designed to sing the praises of whatever nation state and help shape the craft, this new thing of the nation state. And I remember seeing an interview with somebody recently, with all of this contestation about what should be taught and what shouldn't be taught and what we're going to not allow to be taught to our children in history. People were asked, what is the purpose of history? And so many people, conservative people, their response was to have pride in our country. And it just blew my mind, because I'm like, I thought history was to learn the history. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's very contested, as we can see. And that's why it's so important for it to be taught well. I actually went to a great high school, also a private high school in Brooklyn Friends School, Quakers. I had great history teachers. They were also all white men. I learned all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't normally learn in high school. Like I took a year of Chinese history. I did all this stuff, but this history, no, and college, no, and like I literally had to, and my father, who was born in 1898, fought in World War I, right? I mean, he was 65 when I was born. He loved history. He was self-educated. He didn't graduate 8th grade. He couldn't deal with the racism in the school, but he was an autodidact, and history was everything to him. And so he taught me such a love of history. And my mother was a historian too. And, there was just books laying all around my house. Like, so I'm like 11 years old and reading about maroon societies in Brazil, right? Because the book's just laying there, So, it's always been, and then having, like I said, this sort of direct, paternal grandparents born enslaved, I've always felt this profound connection, to history.
I'm just thinking, I'm just loving everything you're saying. I mean, even though what this is difficult, what we're talking about, it's hard for me to keep asking you questions because I just want to dwell on everything you're saying to me. You know, it's making me realize how many people really do think of history as a charter, you know, almost like you work for Starbucks and they're like, this is what we do at Starbucks. These are the rules, a sense of pride, and no, history. Not that.
Yeah, no, I've been in a constant fight with Lloyd's of London, which you'll see if you read
Right.
the book.
And, yeah,
it's ongoing. And yeah, they have a corporate history spin about their you know, their thing. And, you know, when in fact they got their start ensuring the slave trade, and it was like a significant start. It's like literally what got them off the ground and incredibly profitable. And yeah, it's been this ongoing thing of like trying to access their archives.
Well, that scene, which everyone on this call, if you do not have this book yet, but you must buy it. And if you already have one copy, buy another copy and share it with you know, children or youth, and share it with your family and use it to talk about, share it with your sisters. But the scene that Dr. Hall was just referencing, I have to say, when I was reading that, I remember exactly where I was and when it was.
Wow.
And my chest I just felt like, you know, it was a real superhero mode. You know, it was like a Marvel action figure, because you, especially as a woman, person of color, were going up against this, you know, tight ass corporation, and they weren't backing down and you weren't backing down. And it's just one of many scenes where you yourself are involved in resistance. This is really the nesting dolls that you talked about. They're actually nesting warriors.
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, like, you know, it was kind of a joke on the cover. Like I had Hugo put myself and, you know, some of the women we talk about on the Chrysler building, right? Because that's like such a superhero move. And this is New York in the, you know, 18th century. And it's funny because I didn't expect the book to turn out this way, you know, where the historian becomes kind of like a little bit of a superhero. And the kind of joke is like, we need an action figure like the historian. And then I can imagine kids playing with it. Like, oh, it's time to bring in the historian, you know. But I just want to say, this is not a children's book. You know, some people get confused because of the medium. They think it's for children. And I've been saying repeatedly, this is an adult book. This is like, you know, I can imagine 11th graders reading it. I can imagine, but I've actually had to open my mind to it. Like just a couple of weeks ago in Norway, I was interviewed on stage by 3 8th graders, you know, who, and their whole class had read the book. And I'm like, whoa, like, and I think I've come to the understanding that if someone picks up the book and is interested, then they're old enough, right?
Well, it depends, I think, how the material is handled. While I was reading your book, I was, you know, in my home, and my daughter was also reading. She's only 8, and, you know, what are you reading, Mama? And I shared, obviously it's easier to do with the pictures. I shared some of the pictures and kind of gave her the gist, and, you know, she was excited to learn more. So, you know, it's not something I'm going to hand to a child, but it depends on people's dynamics. That, you know, it might be something you can use as a conversational jumping off point. Right. I'm very eager to talk to you about this incredibly brave pivot that you made from academic writing to creative writing. I work sometimes with people who are trying to do exactly that, and they have such a hard time giving themselves permission to you know, do certain things, because academic writing can be a little rigid, a little prescriptive. Could you walk prescriptive. Could you walk us through some of the, you know, considerations or moments where you just decided to give yourself liberty to do things that normally would have been poo-pooed in academia, you know?
Right. So I wasn't in academia anymore. I had been fired 4 times for teaching race. And so it was done with me and I was done with it. Okay. If I were still a professor, I could not have written this. This is not, I mean, I would have had to do it in my free time, which professors don't have. This does not count at all, would not count at all as anything, which is sad And I've actually done talks now with a lot of historians. I had this huge, like 200 historians. I'm like, wow. And they're just fascinated by like, wow, how can we take our research, which is obviously really important to us, and put it in the world, out there in the world. And as academia becomes increasingly fraught and there are few and fewer positions that even pay a living wage, one of the things that I've been talking to people about is like out of the academy. Like, how do you take your research and bring it out of the academy? But the way you described my choices made it sound really intentional, and it really wasn't. It was like this constant sort of backing into something. Like when I started this project, like I said, I'd been fired for the 4th time. My wife is like, okay, I'm like, I've had it with white supremacy, I've just had it, and she's like, just let's remove you from that system and try to figure out what your next move is, like what you should do. And that's when I realized, like, this is what I felt most sad about, that all this research was like behind the academic curtain. And so when I started to create this, I mean, I met Hugo. He was the 3rd artist I tried to work with. And, he was working full-time as a pedicab driver in New Orleans. He had gone to art school and had done a few comics on the web, but he had no idea what he was doing. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was paying, so I was like, let's create 8 pages and do a Kickstarter and raise like $5,000, and then we can do the book and self-publish it. Or I had no idea what we were going to do. And I paid him a per page rate, $100 per page, which I took off a credit card because I didn't have it.
At this point, that was your own money. You did not yet have an advance for this book.
Not at all.
Okay.
No.
And if you don't mind backing up just a few seconds, how did you actually find him? Was he someone you knew or someone recommended?
He was a friend of a friend.
Friend of a friend.
And a really good friend who helped keep me motivated to do this project. She thought it was something that could really happen. And like I said, I tried to work with a couple other artists and learned that artists can be very flaky. It's like, I'm paying you, per page, and you're 3 months late. Like, what's that about? And also I was looking for something very specific. I wanted black and white, but I wanted it dynamic. So if you look at the art, you'll see tons of hatch marks and, et cetera. So, it's a dynamic black and white, right? And I wanted someone who did it by hand. I feel like, I know this isn't apparently a popular thing to say in the graphic novel space, but most people do their art digitally now. And I feel like I can tell, maybe it's my imagination, but I feel like I can tell, and I don't like it. And so to find someone who would like literally sit down with pen and ink and draw on paper, 210 pages, so it was like, we connected, and he didn't know anything about this history, and we figured out how to do this. But like I said, the initial thing was 8 pages. Then a friend was like, yeah, put it on Kickstarter so you can raise, like, we're going to raise $5,000 to pay like me back for fronting him money, and then like his airfare to come here so we could talk and figure out what to do. And our goal was to just self-publish. I didn't think that many people would be interested in the topic. At this point, I mean, this dissertation, I wrote this stuff almost over 15 years ago. And I understood it as kind of my own passion project, not something that would be of general interest. Yeah.
And
then it exploded.
So when you say it exploded, was it the success of the Kickstarter campaign, or what actually led you to get a book deal with Simon?
Yeah, I mean, so what happened is that there were articles written about the Kickstarter, which I didn't even know was a thing. Like, I didn't know people did that. But like, first it was Afropunk, then it was like, so bad. I'm like, hyperallergic. It's like,
yeah, hyperallergenic. Yeah.
It's not hypoallergenic.
It's on your website too.
Yeah, I felt so bad. I was like, apparently it's a big deal. And then Bustle, And then,
Awesome.
so it was getting all this press. And then I started to get contacted. Like I got contacted by this
Okay.
editor at HarperCollins, and he's like, look, I do young adult. This is completely not appropriate for me, but I think this is an important project. You need to get an agent. And I'm
Okay.
like, okay. And I'm like, all I knew about agents were those people that you wrote letters to for 5 years and they may or may not ever get back to you.
Yeah.
So when it was like, wow, we have to get an agent, you know, I was like, how is that ever going to happen? And then I got contacted by an agent, which is like, I don't think that ever happens. And it wasn't just any agent. It was Anjali Singh, who was the person who discovered, I'm doing air quotes because you can't really discover a person, but the person who discovered Persepolis and edited that book. And graphic novel, graphic memoir is her specialty. And she works for this like boutique literary agency in Harlem that focuses on women of color, and Black women in particular.
Fantastic literary agency.
Oh, you know of them? Yeah, I didn't know anything about them, but she, you know, she called me and she's like, I really want to work with you. And let me tell you a little bit what I do. And this is why I think, you know, whatever. And so she taught me, and I'm like, great. And she taught me how to write a book proposal for this context. And so I wrote it, and then I, you know, was completely out of cell phone range. You know, my wife and I were on the Navajo reservation doing some solidarity work on Black Mesa. There's like absolutely no cell phone. I come back and my phone's exploded. And
Yes,
she's like, you have 11 interviews with different publishers.
Oh, wow.
And then, you know, I'm starting to do those, and I think that they're interviewing me. And like 2 interviews into it, I realized that I'm interviewing them. It was like, yeah, it was just like, I mean, we talked about this, Courtney,
because
before.
no one
tells
you through these
anything.
things.
No one tells you anything. And then it was like, it's going to literary auction. And again, I didn't know what that was. For me, the word auction immediately brings to mind slave auction.
Not a great,
you know, I was
not
like,
a great choice of words.
Well, no, and I'm like, so what does that mean? And so then it went to auction, and I think 6 or 7 different publishers bid on it, and I picked Simon and Schuster. It wasn't the highest bid, but they had the best marketing plan. And you know, of the 7 publishers, 2 of the, I guess they're editors, and they're the ones who like, you know, 2 of them were Black women, and I wanted to work with a Black woman. And so those were the only 2 in the running. I didn't want somebody who was like, oh, this is interesting now, and then later I'm not going to care about it. And so, yeah, that's how I picked them. And then, as they say, the rest is history.
So we should probably pause here for people on the call who are writers and, you know, would really like to publish themselves one day in nonfiction or memoir, and who at this current time in publishing might be hearing, oh my gosh, it's impossible to publish memoir. It's impossible, you know, nonfiction. You have to have a platform. You have to have 20,000 followers. I hear this all the time.
Really?
All the time with the writers I work with, and people are very discouraged. And a lot, every time I'm finding, you know, I try to help people find solutions, but I always say the same thing, you know, this is a moment where we need to embrace, even if we think of ourselves as tech challenge, we need to embrace all of the solutions and opportunities available to us through, you know, the digital age, Kickstarter being one of them, right? GoFundMe, whatever the heck it is. I mean, my husband's a filmmaker, so all of his short films were funded by God knows where, you know, bake sales. And, you know, sometimes if the gatekeepers keep saying, no, 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 but you feel in your heart, and you just know in your heart, yes, then find the money for your yes, you know. And I think that your Kickstarter, the fact that you did that with complete faith in the project, and then the gatekeepers came to you.
No, but I didn't have faith in the well, I had faith in the project. I just didn't know what the process was going to be. And I literally 100% believed that there were probably a few hundred people interested in the subject. And so I wasn't expecting, and the Kickstarter was literally about how can we get $5,000? It wasn't about how do we get our stuff out there so people see it. I didn't even know that was a thing. And then it got double funded within 10 days. So it was like, whoa, okay, people. Yeah, so that wasn't my path that you're describing. I know that I think you're the first person who's interviewed, who I've been in conversation with, where this is what you do, right? But I don't know that my path is a lesson because it was so weird and unplanned. But I hope there's something helpful for people.
Maybe not a lesson, but I personally find it inspiring, and I'm sure that a lot of other people will find it inspiring because it's, it's rewarding, I think, especially in a line of work that goes so frequently unrewarded and is so underpaid, if paid at all. I'm talking about
Still broke.
research, right? Yeah. To realize, oh gosh, I thought there might be 100 people interested in this, and in fact, that it's a much larger number. I mean, we have almost 100 people on this call with us today.
Hi, people. Yeah. So, I mean, my new editor, because the other one retired, I was like, great timing. My new editor is like, yeah, there's a lot of critical acclaim for this book, but we wish we were selling more copies. That's our one thing. And it's like, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do about that. But so the takeaway is that they're not really happy. So the point is, everyone, please buy this book. I think it sold, I don't know, last time I checked in a couple months ago, it had sold like 10,000 copies. And then there was another 6,500 copies because Steph Curry picked it up for his book club. I didn't even know he had a book club. But that was printed under some other ISBN number, and it doesn't count. And I don't even know what I'm talking about. So
gosh. Okay. Well, I have a little bit of an idea. So I'm going to put in the chat now for everyone 2 alternatives to Amazon. If you would like to support independent bookshops, you could go to IndieBound. I think it's indiebound.org, bookshop.org. These are larger entities, which you put in your zip code and it'll find the store closest to an independent bookstore closest to you, ship it to you. You can also order this book, Wake, from your favorite local bookstore. And you know what? If the money is tight for you, go to your local library and your local bookshop and just ask them to order it. That's a really dynamic thing that we can do for writers if we can't spend, the money ourselves. But and we're going to soon come up to the public Q&A time.
Oh my goodness, there's so much.
I know it goes. I know. We need to double the. So we'll have to come back.
Yeah,
but
I definitely want to talk. No, you go.
And I just want to remind everyone to start dropping your questions into the Q&A tab. Yeah, Dr. Hall, go on.
Yeah, I just I don't know if this is the best thing to cover in this short amount of time, but it's the thing that excites me kind of the most because I actually have another work in progress now. Simon & Schuster optioned the second book, and I'm writing another graphic narrative. And I'm just so jazzed about this medium. And I wanted to try to explain like what made it special. So can I take a couple minutes to do that?
Please, absolutely. And congratulations on
thank you
for the new project.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing so there are things I feel like you can do in this medium that you can't do in other mediums, right? I mean, you can't do in just like prose, and you can't do like in a film, right? And one of the things was so important is for me to constantly have the past press up against the present. That was the point of this book, right? And so I'll try to show you. I hope you guys can see it. This is a 2-page spread, and it has me walking down the street of New York, in the current time. And then there are, in every reflective surface, there is the past and the haunting of slavery in New York, which we don't have time for, but it was a huge institution, foundational to, the development of that British colony. So I don't know how I would have done that in another medium to have it be this kind of, and the other thing is that, the basic methodology in a graphic medium is you have panels, right? And then you have gutters, and gutters are the space in between the panels. And, if you want to, and the panels are like the frame. Okay. But if you want to see every frame of something, you go to a movie, right? So it's a really big part of the medium to make decisions about what it is that you're featuring, how you're creating the temporality of it. And the readers have to co-create the book, their experience as they're reading it, because they're making all these decisions, like what's happening, between these, I mean, whether they're thinking about it or not, and it makes it a really evocative experience. And then once you have this pattern, like you do in any art, like music or whatever, then you want to strategically interrupt it, for emotional effect at certain times. And so here's an example of me doing research in the state, the municipal archives in New York, and I'm going through all these court records in the 1712 revolt, and I'm trying to find out about these 4 women who are talked about in the criminal records, who are prosecuted. And so then I decided, let's have this push across the gutter and go into the preceding panel. So that is doing something with the temporality immediately, but it's also showing how it's impacting me. And also a big part of what I feel like I can do in this medium is what I'm trying to work on, and creating like a Black feminist methodology of describing the shape of absence, right? Because absence has a shape and it has a role in our society in creating, terrible power dynamics. And so it's so important to try to reclaim it and put it out there, but you need to figure, it's difficult to do. And just as my last statement, like, fangirling about the medium, I think that this medium is something that allows that.
I love that you took the time to share those images with us, because it recalls something else I love about this book, which is that you give weight and respect and space to the emotional weight of the burden of this actual project and the toll that it took upon you. I've never, ever experienced a book like this that pauses sort of midway. We see you as a narrator actually say, I need to leave this library right now and get air. This is becoming too upsetting, or I need to close my computer. I need space. And the way in which you prioritize your mental health as someone who is sifting through this material and trying to find hidden truth, I think is really brave.
I'm glad you thought I was prioritizing.
Innovative.
Because I thought, because prioritizing my mental health at the time, because I wasn't, right? It was more like I would work and then just like, have a nervous breakdown. But yeah, the discussion of the issue of mental health is very much part of this book. And the last chapter, called Ancestry and Progress, is about trying to sum up this whole thing and like, why are we even studying this? Why does it even matter? And I talk about the haunting of slavery, almost like dealing with any other kind of trauma. Like your first response to it is you want to just push it away. Let's not look at it. Why do we need to look at it? And then, but really the power comes from integrating it into yourself, and being able to move forward with that power, is what we're trying to do.
I'm speechless. It's a very important book, and I feel pretty confident that everyone else is just so enraptured listening to you that they're forgetting to put questions into the chat. But if you do have questions, this is your time to type them in. Nope, sorry, not into the chat. Type them into the Q&A bar. I also want to say that something else I thought was really brave and truly original, I just don't see this a lot, was that you also shared and, illustrated with both text and visuals, your research's dead ends and your failures, whether you were being turned away by a Lloyd's or another institution that's just said, yeah, you're not getting access to this, or you had an answer or a photograph, something you were really looking for, and you just, admitted like, I'm not going to find it. And then sometimes you would pivot to, which I think is an incredible move, to saying, hey, I'm going to imagine it. This is how I am choosing to imagine it. That was really non-traditional. And I really do think it's brave, even if you'd already left academia, I mean,
exactly. I mean, I wanted this to be taken very drop dead seriously because, first of all, this is still controversial, which is ridiculous. Among scholars of history, the idea that women participated at all in slave revolt in what is now the United States is like some radical off the wall statement. And
really?
yeah. And so I needed everything to be perfect. Like, and so doing that process, what I call the measured use of historical imagination, where the record fell silent, which is like a chapter and a half in 10 of the chapters of the book. I needed to mark it to keep the integrity of the process. I really wanted to mark clearly, like, I'm doing this now and I'm stopped doing this now. But also history is always a creative process, right? You're looking at documents and you're creating a narrative. But the other thing that I want people to understand is that when I was doing this, like, why were these women, involved in a revolt at this time? What motivated them? These are things that are just not in the record at all, right? Because nobody cared at the time who were chronicling these things what enslaved women cared about, right? And but every single aspect of this was researched so intensely, like every cobblestone, every tree, this plant that one of the women is buried with, like, this is actually an abortifacient plant that grew at this time. What are, one of the documents, the colonial governor of New York writes to the Queen Anne's Privy Council to explain about this revolt. And he talks about kind of an oathing ceremony, but he does it kind of awkwardly, like he has no idea, obviously, what he's talking about. And I knew what oathing ceremonies were, which are like, let's all band together, swear ourselves to silence and our commitment to do this revolt. But, what would it look like? I didn't just be like, whoa, let me make that up. It's like the majority of the enslaved people who were involved in this revolt were from the Akan diaspora, Akan speaking people from what you would call Ghana today. And I could tell that from the names of the people. Right. And there's better documentation of slave revolts, like in Jamaica, same British thing, same 1700s. There was a big revolt in 1740, but there was all these, the powers that be was very interested in describing in infinite detail how these oathing ceremonies happened and what they looked like for the purposes of preventing a slave revolt. So it was like, if you see anyone gathering dirt from the graveyard, then so the point of this is that, every aspect of these like imagined sections, even like how the streets were lit. There are no pictures for 1700, I spent like 20, I've been looking at least 20 years of like the city council minutes, it's like, it's just like, in order, in the dark of the moon, we must light the street and every third house must put out a candle lantern. And I'm like, oh, that's what it looks like. And then, 6 months later, it's like, people are upset about the cost of the candles. So now we're moving into every fifth house. And, it just, yeah.
That I'm sorry, I've lost my breath because I was on city council for a while, just in this local podunk town, and the minutes crushed me, and I only made it 3 years, and I couldn't handle it. We have questions rolling, and you'll also be happy to know that there's some people who are saying, just ordered the book, just ordered the book. Let's see, from Lucien. Please talk more about the concept that the sounds or cries made by slaves who plunged into the ocean can be carried for many years, forever, and we could still hear them today, perhaps through your work.
Yeah. So I'm not a scientist, but I actually researched this, and it's a true thing that sound carries differently in water, and that it lasts longer in water. And, a big part of this book is trying to recover the stories of enslaved people on slave ships. And so that was kind of I've never been asked this question. That's interesting. Thanks for the question. But I would need to think more about it. I mean, I feel like that was kind of a way to talk about the emotional impact and how we connect with the past. Yeah, and that, I mean, that was the point of that. And while we're talking about the slave trade, I just wanted to give an example of like why this history is still controversial. There, historians, when the internet came together, and they're like, these historians who studied the slave trade, it's like, let's put all of our data together in a big database that we can search and question and query. And they put together 36,000 slave ship voyages in a database that's still on the internet. It's free, you can access it. And the first thing they asked the database was, how many revolts were there during the Middle Passage? And they found that 1 in 10 ships had revolts, which like surprised everyone, because as the person who just asked the question, I mean, it was basically like a suicide act. And I mean, there's some exceptions that are awesome, but and then they were like, well, what's the difference between the ships that had revolts and the ships that didn't have revolts? And the only thing that was statistically different was that the more women on a ship, the more likely a revolt. And they immediately dismissed their own findings, because like, we know that women didn't do that, right? And I didn't know that. And also with my legal background, I dug deep into the legislation and regulation of the slave trade, because it was a huge business. It wasn't something on the down low, right? So I'm in the UK researching. Turns out there's a whole regulation for how slave ships are run. And that once the ship left the coast of Africa, women were unchained and brought on deck. Right. And so women had all this mobility, and that's where the weapons were. So it makes perfect sense, right? And then looking through captain's log after captain's log after captain's log, and Lloyd's of London insured against insurrection. The policies were called insurance against the insurrection of cargo, right? and because of that, ship captains had to detail revolts, because that was the evidence that was used when they went to get their policy, whatever. That's why I needed to go to Lloyd's of London, is because I wanted to find more. I didn't want to sue them. I wanted to actually just find more stories. And so if the historians could let go of their preconceptions, they could go down this path and try to figure it out instead of dismissing it. And there's a whole historiography for why this is so controversial. I like to think what has made me the happiest is that the people who read this, who aren't historians, don't at all find it controversial. And even now, more historians are like, yes, have you read Dr. Hall's book? And yeah, so.
We have a question from Lisa Herrick, who I could be wrong, but I think this might be the writer Lisa Herrick, who we had on recently. If it is, hello. If it isn't, hi, Lisa. What was the greatest difficulty in creating a graphic novel that aligned with both your research and your voice and tone? The greatest challenge in creating a graphic novel that aligned with both your research and your voice and tone.
This is interesting. This is obviously a author's talk, right? And I've done so many different things, from like high schools to like conferences to what. This is my first one of these. So now you guys are like pushing me. Now I need to think. The biggest challenge. So, I'm very not a spiritual person. I'm not very woo-woo, although if you read the book, you might feel like, but, tropes I've heard about the creative process is like, oh yeah, like it just came through me. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, of course, whatever. But I literally, like, when it was time to write the script, I like checked into an Airbnb in Harlem and just started. And it was like, it literally just started. And I found myself putting sentences together. You know what it was? It's like a lifetime of distilling things, and part of that has been being a teacher. Part of it is being just a screaming intellectual who reads all the time. Part of it is having a child, a teenager, it's like, you got to get in and out in 30 seconds, right? Or they're going to lose, And so I've kind of learned how to like keep the prose as spare as possible. And that was important to me, because you can see one of the mistakes in these kind of illustrated books where there's so much text, it buries the art, and the relationship between the art and text is what the medium is about. So it was crucial for me to be as spare as possible and have each word have a power. And I didn't know that I could do that. And it really was, I mean, I had to become like a diva. I had to like get food delivered and nobody called me
Love
and
it.
talked to me.
Living the dream.
On your credit card. Yeah. So so I don't know if that answers the question. I would need to think kind of more about it, but that, yeah.
And we have a comment from Karen Shepherd. So same thing, this might be the author, Karen Shepherd. If it is, hi Karen, miss you. And if it's not, hi Karen, nice to meet you. And Karen's comment is, I truly hope your book will prevent history from repeating itself. What's indeed hope. And then we have Amber, who loves everything you're doing and wonders if you would consider teaching again.
Sorry. The kind of, I made a conscious decision not to sue the last people who fired me, and to instead put my energy into something productive. And I would not go back into academia. I'm not interested in their constraints. I'm not interested in the way they think. But the irony of being repeatedly forbidden from teaching, even though I loved my students and my students loved me, and it was just, was that the irony, and I was like, okay, I'm foreclosed from this, which is a calling for me. Right. And it was so painful. Like, I mean, I could start crying now. But now I'm writing curriculum for the entire state of New York. So, it's funny. Like, I would love to actually do kind of like, if there's some way for me to like teach where I wouldn't have to deal with any of these sort of constraints, I'm old. I'm like, I'm not interested in dealing with systems like that. I don't want to be in any of those systems. I'm trying to be in as few of them as possible, but I could imagine doing like a visiting thing for a semester. Sure. Or yeah, I'm going to be doing that in New England. I can't talk about it yet, but I'll be on your coast next academic year. It's not really teaching, it's a research fellowship, but yeah.
And so that's actually great, because I wanted to remind people to follow you on Twitter at the @sign Wake Revolts.
And you'll learn all about my animals and everything I'm angry about. And
perfect. And I imagine that's how we'll find out about where you're going to be for your various endeavors. And I'm
coming to New York in a couple days for the PEN America Awards.
Oh, congrats!
My book was, is a finalist, and they have a ceremony.
Yeah, a big one. That's one of the biggest celebrations in our country of America. And congratulations!
Thanks for letting me know. No one's telling me. I just got an email.
It's a big deal. Very big deal.
It's cocktail attire. I don't even know what that is.
Oh, you got to dress up a little bit. You got to wear something, elevated, I guess. But you can call me. We'll talk.
Okay, I will. Thank you. I'm not into clothes. That's not my thing.
That's all right. The Eileen Fisher has comfortable stuff. There's some other questions that came in.
And a parka?
No, flats. Flats are very in. Maybe flats and a parka and a statement necklace. You don't need to do anything. You wrote an incredible book and just show up with that. So there's a few other questions that came in, but I promise you all that your questions are answered in this book. So I'm purposely not going to ask those questions now, because I want you hungry and I want you to go buy this. And if you need another reason to buy this incredible book, it is Black History Month. Now, we should be reading books like this all the time.
It's Women's History Month next month.
And Women's History. So get this as a gift, and wake up a little bit and buy Wake. And so we've hit time, but I do want to indulge and just ask one more question that I'm burning to know. You dedicated this to your grandmother Harriet. I have that right. What do you think Harriet, if she were alive, what do you think that she would think of this book?
I think she would be I mean, my father loved her so much and had so many stories about her. And I feel like I almost have like a sense of her personality. And I think she would have been really proud. And, you know, she was never taught to read. She wasn't allowed to read, you know, but she was brilliant, you know. And so to have a grandchild who has this level of education, I think it would have been so amazing for her. You know, that thing like, you know, my ancestors' wildest dreams. But I think also she would have been horrified at the nightmare of a country we have, and that we're still in this nightmare. You know?
Yes.
That's what she would think.
Well, let's focus on the positive, which is that you've really created something incredible, and you are getting back at some of your employers by writing curriculum for New York. We are soon going to be going to our exit screen, but I want to let people know we are continuing these awesome conversations every month. March 22nd, I'll be joined in conversation by the award-winning journalist and writer Annabelle Abbs about her fantastic latest book, Windswept. And in the meantime, you can catch up and read Wake, and follow Dr. Hall on Twitter at Wake Revolts. You can follow me. I'm in all the places.
And if you have questions, I respond to people on Twitter. So just, you know, at me.
at her.
Yes.
Dr. Hall, thank you so much for joining us, especially with your mountain of travel behind you and all of the things that you have going on. This has been really meaningful for me, and I can tell from the enthusiastic chat that this has been deeply meaningful for everyone else lucky enough to join. So thank you, and best of luck with this new project that you have underway.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. You know, thank the Mount, and thank you. This has been really, it's been different. It's made me think. I've had
Good. Good. Okay, well, no more thinking tonight, I hope. And
I wish.
Dr. Hall, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and the Mount, as always, thank you so much for hosting, and we'll see you again in more or less a month's time. Bye, everybody.